I think it's nice to sort of have a talk in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Which is more informal, and also I think the kitchen is a place to have a conversation.
We're in a very cosy environment.
Yes.
Cozier than your studio.
Oh, absolutely. And the studio, I think, is for painting, really, and the kitchen is for talking and sort of, meeting friends.
You've been here for 40 years, but you've also travelled the world and lived the world over. What do you think you were looking for?
Well, self-knowledge. I mean, I didn't want to be or grow up in the kind of surroundings I was born into or how I grew up. I just didn't want to be like them, but I had no idea what I wanted to be. And so I had to find a kind of a shape through association with people I found interesting, who I would meet on my travels. Hitchhiking, because I hitchhiked a lot. We slept in the bridges. I mean, really rough. And in those kind of meetings, first of all, you learn about people, but you certainly learn about yourself. I could easily have been killed, and I haven't been. So, I've had some dicey adventures, but mostly people have been incredibly kind, really.
And that's factored into your work?
Especially in my early work, although it's still there, is this real anger about the big gap between what you are and how you are expected to conform. Now, I mean, I think conformity is fine to some extent, because, we have a society, we have to live together and be tolerant of each other. But there comes an extent that everything becomes a lie, this keeping up of a certain facade that will made you or your kind of surroundings look a certain way. And I have found it always incredibly suffocating, and it has made me very angry, but not knowing really how to deal with it particularly. So my kind of response was to drop out and sort of say, listen, I'm not going to live in that kind of society. It's not the solution, I'm not trying to find a solution for a social inequality, but how you can be truthful to yourself and function at the same time in the world.
But why is it so hard?
There is this great kind of urgeness about power. And, we all want to be, even if we think we don't, but we all want to be sort of like a little bit more powerful than the other one, have a little bit more control. So you can control your dog because you can't control your boss, for instance, at work. I don't mean it has to be nasty, but there is always a sense of kind of control to be loved or the control to be feared, really.
Your work seems to push harder than others at moving people beyond those expectations. Do you feel that? Do you understand that from an audience perspective?
I totally agree. I mean, I like to stir up a bit of dust. And I have a sort of sense, I think, of an enfant terrible in me that, sort of like when everything gets, say, predictable in either conversation or in a get-together, I have a tendency to, I'm not an educator, but make people think or make people get slightly from, what is this about, And then not to ask me, but to ask themselves.
As you say, you don't have the answers, you're just posing the questions.
Yeah. And I think the question is really, I think curiosity is a very, very important part of growing. And the curiosity is that you sort of see or hear something which you even might not agree with, but which makes you think that there is a possibility that you can extend your vision a little bit or your view a little bit. Shall I give you a bit more tea?
Yes, please, yeah.
Yeah, but of course, I have also conformed. I mean, we're sitting now in my kitchen. I have actually a table. This is like, it is my place. So even if I rent it, we have a sort of central heating going on. I have sort of, I had a haircut. I have sort of clothes, nice kind of cashmere pullover. So, I'm not without conformity. I think you have to pick your battles. In the beginning, you sort of go against everything. Like a child does. But then later on, you sort of like, you get more, I guess, more sophisticated in what you want to resist or rebel against, what is worthy of your energy.
I think now I should ask about your Rebel Women series.
All right, yeah.
Purely on that basis, because these are scenes of women, biblical women, ancient history, ancient religious history, the Old Testament stories of Judith or Salome, these ladies who can be seen in many ways as the agents in their own stories.
Well, they although they were sort of like, they appear in the Old Testament, the stories, and of course in the Jewish Torah, they are really, they were apocryphal, so mostly they were not considered as totally true factual stories. Now, historically, some of these women have actually existed, but their stories have become, in a way, these are archetypes, which makes them interesting. I think they're also they're not particularly nice people. They kill, they sort of manipulate, they sort of make fools out of men, of course, which is, of course, in my case, very, very funny. But they did things on their own terms in a time when women had nearly no terms whatsoever to function in. And I found it sort of like a great resonance. I can't say to contemporary time, because we have a lot more, power, social power, than we had certainly in those times. But it was in a response to the Me Too kind of movement, which I felt that some parts of it, because I'm quite in favor that this was started, absolutely, but that was a little bit a mode of victimhood creeping in. And I thought, no, the important thing is that if men and women want to be equal in power in society, there should be no victimhood, because, you're not going to give the other party the power to say, you have victimized me. And these women, none of them was allowing to be victimized. And so I found that sort of very, very powerful ingredient in the stories. And that's why I used them in a way to tell my aspects of it. I got them originally, the knowledge of them, from paintings, especially sort of like late Renaissance, early Baroque paintings, where the subject matter often has been these kind of women, because they're often, sort of like the Susanna and the Bezers, there was a lot of nudity in it, there was a lot of sex and death in it. So it was a very, very nice subject matter for painting. And so I will look up their stories. So I, through really images that I learned about them, they are sort of part of our society, but we have forgotten about a lot of it now.
And a lot of them are art historical tropes.
Yes.
A lot of people personally, you might recognise Judith with the head of Holofernes because you've seen the Caravaggio image, or
exactly.
It's translated through this Renaissance, Baroque, whoever imagery. That's how we kind of associate it. Exactly. Maybe more than with the original texts.
Oh yes, yes. I think the medium of painting, different than literature and music, but painting is illusion. So you have sort of create a three-dimensional world on a two-dimensional surface, that you can really give people an experience, which is sort of like very, very different than if they had actually the experience in so-called real life. Everything is contained within the outline of the canvas in such a way that it sort of focuses people, that they don't look beside the canvas and say, oh, there's nice flowers, or like those people's shoes or whatever. And that is, I think, the skill of an artist, where, say, in a kind of whole room space where all kind of objects are, that you only look within that particular field, and it doesn't move. It's not like a film or television, which sort of like focuses you. It doesn't move. The movement has to go inside you, inside the viewer. And I find that exciting. I think painting is, I've been doing it non-stop, and I'm not going to stop at all with it, but I think it's absolutely a very challenging and interesting medium because of that.